the hum of the server racks was the constant lullaby of our office. A low thrumming bass line beneath the staccato clicks of keyboards and the occasional murmur of hushed conversations. It was a world of logic gates and elegant algorithms, a place where lines of code translated into tangible functionality, where the abstract became concrete. I thrived in it, finding a peculiar satisfaction in the meticulous crafting of software, the debugging of errors, the pursuit of that elusive perfect solution. My desk, nestled in a quiet corner, was usually a battlefield of open IDEs and sprawling codebases, a testament to the hours I poured into my work. We were a small team, a cohort of dedicated programmers tasked with building bespoke applications for various clients, each project a complex puzzle demanding focus and precision. The stakes, while not life or death, were significant: client satisfaction, project deadlines, the reputation of our small but ambitious firm. I took my role seriously, perhaps too seriously at times, seeing each bug as a personal affront, each successful deployment as a small victory. This dedication wasn't just about professional pride. It was about the intrinsic joy of creation, the intellectual challenge that programming offered. I loved the quiet intensity of it, the way my mind would narrow, focusing solely on the intricate dance of variables and functions, losing track of time as I delved deeper into the digital architecture. Our office was open plan, a modern design choice meant to foster collaboration and transparency, but it also meant that everything was on display, every habit, every distraction. I was acutely aware of my surroundings, not in a nosy way, but in the way a craftsman observes the tools and materials around them, understanding their utility and their place. The air was often thick with the scent of stale coffee and the faint, metallic tang of overworked electronics. Whiteboards adorned the walls, scrawled with flowcharts and pseudocode, remnants of brainstorming sessions and problem-solving endeavors. It was a space that, for me, symbolized purpose and productivity. I came in early, stayed late, often finding myself the last one to leave, the silence of the empty office a welcome companion as I tied up loose ends or explored new ideas. My passion for the craft was genuine, almost obsessive, and it colored my perception of everyone else in that shared space, setting a high, often unspoken, bar for commitment. It was within this environment, this crucible of code and commitment, that the seeds of a very different kind of project began to sprout, a project born not of logic, but of pure, unadulterated frustration. The quiet intensity one sought, however, was frequently shattered, not by the usual office chatter or the occasional phone call, but by a distinct, almost rhythmic series of clicks emanating from a desk not far from mine. This was the domain of Alex, a colleague who had joined our team a few months prior. Alex was, on paper, a programmer, possessing the requisite qualifications and having passed the initial interviews. Yet, in practice, their contribution to our shared endeavors felt, to me, negligible. From the moment they arrived each morning, often a little later than everyone else, their focus seemed to drift not towards the pressing deadlines or the complex algorithms we were wrestling with, but towards the glowing screen of their monitor, where the vibrant colors and frantic movements of a video game often played out. It started subtly, a quick 5-minute break that stretched into 10, then 20. Soon these breaks became the default state. The telltale sounds of a fantasy RPG, the clanging of swords, the triumphant fanfares of leveling up, the repetitive, almost hypnotic background music, became an irritating counterpoint to the server hum. It wasn't just the gaming, it was the napping too. There were days I'd glance over, expecting to see Alex hunched over their keyboard, deep in thought, only to find their head lolled back, eyes closed, a faint snore sometimes audible above the general office din. A blanket, inexplicably, sometimes made an appearance, draped over their chair, ready for impromptu slumber. It was an audacious display of disinterest, a flagrant disregard for the professional environment we were all supposed to be sharing. My initial reaction was a mix of disbelief and mild annoyance. Perhaps it was a temporary phase, I reasoned, a way to decompress from the pressures of a new job. But weeks bled into months, and the pattern solidified. While I was poring over lines of code, debugging intricate functions, or meticulously crafting new features, Alex was conquering virtual dragons or exploring digital dungeons. Our shared projects, the ones that required collaborative effort, began to suffer. Deadlines loomed, and the workload, instead of being distributed evenly, seemed to gravitate disproportionately towards me. I found myself picking up the slack, staying even later, working through lunch breaks, all to compensate for the gaping hole in productivity left by Alex's constant idleness. The frustration began to simmer, a low, persistent burn beneath my professional composure. It wasn't just about the extra work, it was the principle of it, the sheer audacity of someone collecting a salary for what amounted to a prolonged gaming session and a series of power naps. The shared responsibility, the very foundation of teamwork, felt betrayed. Each time I had to explain why a certain module was delayed, or why I was struggling to meet a deadline, the unspoken reason Alex's inaction gnawed at me. The injustice felt palpable, and the quiet hum of the servers began to sound less like a lullaby and more like a mocking drone. The simmering frustration eventually began to boil over. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a gradual accumulation of small slights and mounting pressure. I tried to ignore it, to focus solely on my own work, but Alex's presence, or rather, their lack of productive presence, became an inescapable irritant. Every time I saw them leaning back, eyes glued to a game, or worse, completely asleep, a fresh wave of resentment washed over me. It felt like a personal affront, a direct challenge to my own work ethic and dedication. Our boss, a perpetually busy man named Mr. Henderson, was often buried under his own pile of administrative tasks and client meetings. He was a good man, fair and generally supportive, but he also operated under the assumption that his team was as dedicated as he was. He trusted us, and that trust, I felt, was being exploited by Alex. I considered speaking to Alex directly to confront them about their habits. I rehearsed the conversation in my head countless times. Look, we're a team, and your gaming is impacting our deadlines. Or, I'm picking up your slack and it's not fair. But each time, the words felt hollow, inadequate. What if they denied it? What if they feigned ignorance? The thought of a direct confrontation filled me with a strange mix of apprehension and a sense of futility. I imagined them shrugging, offering some flimsy excuse, and then returning to their game the moment my back was turned. It felt like a battle I was destined to lose, a conversation that would only escalate the tension without resolving the core issue. Then I thought about escalating it to Mr. Henderson. This seemed like the more professional, more appropriate course of action. But again, hesitation crept in. I wasn't a tattletale. I prided myself on handling my own issues, on being a problem solver, not a problem reporter. Moreover, I worried about the perception. Would I be seen as petty? As someone who couldn't handle minor workplace annoyances? What if Mr. Henderson, in his busyness, dismissed my concerns, or worse, saw it as a sign of my own inability to manage team dynamics? The thought of creating office drama, of becoming that guy who complained, was deeply unappealing. I also knew Mr. Henderson valued a harmonious team environment, and I didn't want to be the one to disrupt it, even if the disruption was already there, caused by Alex. So I remained silent, outwardly. Inwardly, however, a different kind of thought began to take root. If direct confrontation was unappealing, and official escalation felt risky, what other options were there? My mind, trained in the logic of programming, began to seek an alternative solution, a more indirect, perhaps even elegant, way to address the problem. The frustration, instead of dissipating, began to coalesce into a more focused, more strategic energy. It wasn't about anger anymore, not entirely. It was about finding a loophole, a clever workaround, a way to restore balance without resorting to conventional methods. The idea, when it finally formed, was born from a unique blend of my programming expertise and my simmering resentment. It was a mischievous whisper at first, then a fully formed concept, a digital prank that felt perfectly tailored to the situation. The thought of it brought a strange, almost giddy sense of anticipation. It wouldn't be a direct confrontation, but a subtle, almost invisible intervention. It would be a ghost in the machine, a silent protest, a digital nudge that would, I hoped, gently but firmly steer Alex away from their gaming escapades and back towards the work they were paid to do. The plan began to solidify, taking shape in the quiet corners of my mind, fueled by every click of Alex's mouse, every triumphant fanfare from their speakers. The plan, once conceived, began to consume my thoughts. It was a delicate operation, requiring precision and a deep understanding of system architecture, much like crafting a complex piece of software. The goal was simple: to disrupt Alex's gaming habit without leaving a trace, to make their computer an inhospitable environment for their virtual adventures. My weapon of choice would be the very game they so frequently indulged in. I knew the specific game they played, having seen it on their screen countless times. It was a popular, if somewhat dated, online RPG, a game that, like many, relied on an executable file to launch. My first step was reconnaissance. I needed to understand the target environment. This meant observing Alex's habits even more closely, noting the exact path to the game's executable, the typical launch sequence, and any other relevant details about their system setup. I made mental notes of their user account privileges, their typical login times, and the general state of their desktop. I also needed to ensure my own actions would remain undetected. I was careful to perform my preparatory work during off hours, either very early in the morning before anyone else arrived, or late in the evening after everyone had left. The office, in those quiet hours, felt like my personal laboratory, the perfect clandestine setting for my digital experiment. The core of my plan revolved around manipulating the game's executable file. I wouldn't delete it, that would be too obvious. I wouldn't corrupt the entire operating system, that would be too destructive and easily traceable. My aim was surgical, precise. I decided to introduce a subtle, yet fatal, flaw into the executable itself. This required a hexadecimal editor, a powerful tool that allows direct manipulation of a file's raw binary data. It was like performing microsurgery on a digital organism, altering its DNA at the most fundamental level. My idea was to find a specific, non-critical section of the executable, perhaps a data string, a resource pointer, or a small block of unused space, and introduce a single, carefully placed byte error. This error wouldn't prevent the program from loading entirely, but it would cause a critical exception during runtime, forcing a crash. The beauty of this approach was its subtlety. A single byte change is incredibly difficult to detect without specialized tools and a deep understanding of the file's structure. It would appear as a random, inexplicable crash, a phantom bug. I spent hours researching common crash patterns, looking for the most effective and least traceable method. I didn't want a memory access violation that pointed directly to a specific function. I wanted something more generic, something that would baffle even an experienced IT professional. I settled on altering a specific value within the game's resource section, a value that, when accessed during the game's initialization phase, would cause an unexpected overflow or an invalid pointer dereference, leading to an immediate, unrecoverable crash. The challenge was to find the right byte, the one that would cause maximum disruption with minimum footprint. I considered various locations, testing hypothetical scenarios in my mind, weighing the risks and rewards of each approach. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about the intellectual challenge of crafting the perfect digital trap. The more I delved into the technical details, the more excited I became. It was a puzzle, and I was determined to solve it with elegant, undetectable precision. The thought of Alex's frustration, their bewildered expression as their game repeatedly crashed, filled me with a quiet, almost scholarly satisfaction. This wasn't just a prank, it was a carefully engineered solution to a persistent problem, a digital protest against idleness. The actual execution of the plan required a window of opportunity, a moment when Alex was away from their desk and I could access their machine without suspicion. Such opportunities were surprisingly frequent, given Alex's propensity for extended coffee breaks, long lunches, or simply disappearing for a while. I waited patiently, observing, planning, like a predator stalking its prey, but with a keyboard and mouse as my tools. One afternoon, the perfect moment presented itself. Alex had announced they were stepping out for a quick errand, which usually meant an hour-long disappearance. As soon as the coast was clear, I made my move. My heart hammered a little in my chest, a mix of adrenaline and the thrill of clandestine operation. I walked casually to Alex's desk, feigning interest in a document on my own screen, then subtly veered towards their computer. Their machine was unlocked, as usual, a testament to their lax security habits. I quickly opened the File Explorer, navigating directly to the game's installation directory. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a practiced dance of commands. I located the main executable file, the one Alex clicked on countless times a day. Before making any changes, I took a quick mental snapshot of the file's original timestamp. This was crucial for my next equally important step, forensic camouflage. I then launched my hexadecimal editor. The screen filled with a dizzying array of hexadecimal characters, a dense tapestry of zeros and ones represented in base 16. It was a language only a programmer truly understood, a raw, unadulterated view into the heart of a file. I navigated to the specific offset I had identified during my research, the precise byte I intended to alter. With a single, deliberate keystroke, I changed a 0 to a 1, or perhaps a f to a seemingly insignificant alteration, but one that, in the intricate logic of a program, would be catastrophic. The change was minuscule, almost invisible to the naked eye, yet its implications were profound. It was like subtly shifting a single gear in a complex machine. The machine might start, but it would inevitably seize up. After saving the modified executable, the critical part of the camouflage began. I needed to ensure that the file's modification timestamp didn't betray my intervention. Most operating systems automatically update a file's last modified timestamp whenever it's altered. This would be a glaring red flag, immediately pointing to recent tampering. Using a command line utility I had prepared beforehand, a small script designed for this very purpose, I meticulously reset the game executable's timestamp to its original value, the one I had noted just moments before. I also ensured its last accessed timestamp was consistent with other files Alex had recently opened. This was the digital equivalent of wiping fingerprints, making sure no digital trace of my presence remained. The file now looked as if it had never been touched, its metadata perfectly aligned with its supposed history. I double-checked everything, ensuring the file size hadn't changed in any noticeable way. A single byte alteration wouldn't affect the size significantly, which was another reason for its stealth. Satisfied, I closed the hexadecimal editor and the File Explorer, leaving Alex's desktop exactly as I had found it. I walked back to my desk, a faint smile playing on my lips. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, but it was now mixed with a sense of triumph. The trap was set. The bait was the game itself. And the unsuspecting target was about to walk right into it. The perfection of the execution, the seamless blend of technical skill and strategic planning, filled me with a quiet, almost artistic satisfaction. It was a masterpiece of digital subterfuge, and I couldn't wait for the show to begin. The next morning, the office atmosphere felt charged with an almost palpable anticipation, at least for me. I arrived early as usual, settling into my routine, but with an underlying current of excitement. I watched Alex's arrival with keen interest, trying to appear nonchalant, my peripheral vision constantly tracking their movements. They sauntered in, coffee in hand, looking as unburdened by the world as ever. They greeted a few colleagues, exchanged some pleasantries, and then, predictably, settled into their chair. The first few minutes were standard, checking emails, perhaps a quick browse of social media. Then came the familiar click, the unmistakable sound of the game icon being double-clicked. My heart gave a little flutter. This was it, the moment of truth. The game's loading screen appeared, the vibrant graphics and triumphant music filling the air for a few brief seconds. Alex leaned back, a look of relaxed anticipation on their face, clearly ready to dive into their virtual world. And then it happened. Not with a bang, but a whimper. The screen flickered, the music abruptly cut out, and a generic Windows error message popped up. The program has stopped working. Windows is checking for a solution to the problem. Followed by the dreaded, a problem caused the program to stop working correctly. Windows will close the program and notify you if a solution is available. Alex blinked. Twice. A faint frown creased their brow. They clicked Close Program, and the error box vanished, replaced by their desktop. For a moment, they just stared at the screen, a look of mild confusion replacing their earlier relaxation. Then they tried again. Another double click. Another brief flash of the loading screen. Another abrupt crash. The same error message. This time, the confusion deepened into a visible annoyance. They muttered something under their breath, perhaps a curse. They tried a third time, as if sheer force of will could overcome the digital anomaly. The result was identical. The game refused to launch. I watched, a silent observer, a phantom puppeteer pulling invisible strings. A quiet sense of triumph began to bloom in my chest. It was working. Perfectly. Alex then did something I hadn't entirely anticipated, but which ultimately played into my hands. Instead of immediately suspecting foul play or even a simple game corruption, they began to troubleshoot. They tried restarting the computer. They checked their internet connection. They even opened a different, less demanding game, which, to their dismay, also crashed, likely due to a shared dependency or a similar, subtle alteration I had made to a common library file during my initial reconnaissance, just in case. The frustration on their face was becoming more pronounced, a shift from mild annoyance to genuine bewilderment. They were clearly baffled, unable to comprehend why their digital playground had suddenly become a minefield. I maintained my poker face, occasionally glancing over with a feigned look of concern, as if I too was observing a strange, inexplicable phenomenon. "Everything all right over there, Alex?" I might ask, just loud enough to be heard, injecting a note of innocent inquiry into my voice. "Your computer seems to be acting up." Alex would just shake their head, mumbling about weird glitches or system issues. The beauty of it was that the crashes were so generic, so seemingly random, that they pointed to a general system instability rather than a specific, targeted attack. My digital ghost was doing its job, haunting Alex's machine with silent, untraceable precision. The show had truly begun, and the first act was a resounding success. The crashes became a recurring nightmare for Alex. Every morning, the ritual would repeat: the hopeful launch of the game, the brief flicker of the loading screen, and then the inevitable, disheartening crash. The initial confusion on Alex's face morphed into a deep-seated frustration, then a kind of weary resignation. Their usual relaxed demeanor began to fray at the edges. The rhythmic clicks of the mouse were replaced by exasperated sighs, the triumphant fanfares by muttered curses. The office, once filled with the subtle sounds of their virtual escapades, was now punctuated by the jarring silence following each failed launch. I continued my performance, maintaining an air of detached concern. "Still having trouble with your computer, Alex?" I'd ask, my voice carefully modulated to convey sympathy rather than suspicion. "That's really strange. Maybe it's a driver issue?" I'd offer vague, unhelpful suggestions, knowing full well they wouldn't solve anything. Alex would usually just grunt in response, their focus entirely consumed by the phantom problem. They tried everything a non-expert user might attempt: reinstalling the game, running system scans, checking for Windows updates. Each attempt was met with the same crushing failure. The game, their primary source of distraction and enjoyment at work, had become an unplayable tormentor. The most satisfying part was watching Alex's internal struggle. They were clearly addicted to their gaming, and the sudden, inexplicable inability to indulge that addiction was causing genuine distress. They'd pace around their desk, run their hands through their hair, and stare blankly at the screen as if willing it to comply. The naps, too, became less frequent. It seemed the constant frustration of the crashing computer made it difficult for them to relax into slumber. The idleness that had so infuriated me was being replaced, not yet by productivity, but by a restless, unproductive agitation. What I hadn't fully anticipated, however, was Alex's reluctance to admit the true nature of their computer usage to our boss, Mr. Henderson. Their gaming habit was, after all, a breach of company policy and a clear dereliction of duty. To confess that their primary problem was an unplayable video game would be tantamount to admitting their daily truancy. So, instead, Alex began to spin a narrative. Their computer, they claimed, was experiencing inexplicable system crashes that were severely impeding their ability to work. They spoke of random reboots and software conflicts, painting a picture of a machine gone rogue, an innocent victim of technological malfunction. This narrative, while a lie, was perfectly plausible to Mr. Henderson. He wasn't a technical expert. He relied on us, his programmers, to understand the intricacies of the machines. He heard computer problems and immediately thought of legitimate technical issues. Alex's reluctance to admit their gaming habit was a crucial, unexpected twist that amplified the success of my prank. It meant they couldn't simply say, "My game keeps crashing, fix it." They had to frame it as a work-related impediment, thereby drawing Mr. Henderson into the web of my digital deception. The stage was now set for the next, equally amusing act of this silent play. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, was about to become an unwitting participant in my carefully orchestrated revenge. The moment Alex finally approached Mr. Henderson about their computer problems was a quiet victory for me. I overheard the conversation, feigning deep concentration on my code, but my ears were sharply tuned to their hushed tones. Alex, with a practiced air of professional concern, explained how their machine was suffering from these intermittent, inexplicable crashes that were making it impossible to perform their duties. They emphasized the word inexplicable, a subtle but crucial detail that reinforced the idea of a mysterious, untraceable issue. Mr. Henderson, ever the diligent manager, listened patiently, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. He took Alex's claims at face value, as any reasonable boss would. "Intermittent crashes, you say?" Mr. Henderson mused, tapping a pen against his chin. "That's certainly not ideal. Is it affecting your ability to meet deadlines?" Alex nodded gravely. "Absolutely, Mr. Henderson. I'm finding it incredibly difficult to get anything done. It's almost as if the system is rejecting my work. I try to open a program, and boom, it just shuts down." They carefully avoided mentioning which program was causing the most trouble, letting Mr. Henderson assume it was a work-related application. Mr. Henderson, being a manager who valued productivity and employee well-being, immediately sprang into action. He wasn't a technical wizard, but he knew enough to try the basic troubleshooting steps. He walked over to Alex's desk, a look of determination on his face. "Let's take a look," he said, pulling up a chair. "Show me what's happening." I watched, a silent, amused spectator, as Mr. Henderson began his diagnostic attempts. He started with the most obvious things. He checked the power cables, ensuring they were firmly plugged in. He opened the task manager, looking for any rogue processes consuming excessive resources. He checked the event viewer, a system log that records errors and warnings, hoping to find a clear indication of the problem. Of course, the event viewer was a jumble of generic application crash reports, offering no specific culprit or pattern that would point to my subtle intervention. The beauty of my single-byte alteration was its ability to mimic a random memory error, something that could be caused by anything from a faulty RAM stick to a corrupted driver. Mr. Henderson tried to launch a few common applications, a web browser, a word processor, which, to my slight relief, opened without issue. My target was specific, primarily the game and any closely related dependencies. This made the problem seem even more baffling to him. That's odd," he muttered, scratching his head. "It seems to work fine for these. What about the one you were having trouble with?" Alex, with a hesitant glance at me, I was still feigning deep work, reluctantly pointed to the game icon. It's mostly this one, sir. And sometimes others, but this one is the most frequent." Mr. Henderson, still unaware of the game's true nature as Alex's primary work time activity, clicked the icon. The familiar loading screen appeared, then the inevitable crash. Mr. Henderson's eyes widened slightly. "Well, I'll be," he said, genuinely perplexed. He tried again. Same result. He tried running it as administrator. Still crashed. He even tried reinstalling the game, downloading a fresh copy from the internet, a process that took a considerable amount of time. He was convinced it was a legitimate software issue, perhaps a corrupted installation file or a compatibility problem. I watched him, a mix of amusement and a twinge of guilt stirring within me. The amusement won out. My revenge was unfolding perfectly, drawing the unsuspecting boss into the intricate web of my digital prank. He was now officially on the hook, tasked with solving a problem that, by its very design, was unsolvable through conventional means. The poor man was about to embark on a frustrating, futile quest, all because of a single, strategically placed byte. Mr. Henderson, a man of methodical habits and a strong sense of responsibility, was now fully invested in solving Alex's computer problem. What started as a quick diagnostic check turned into a persistent, time-consuming endeavor. He genuinely believed he was dealing with a complex technical issue, and his managerial pride wouldn't allow him to simply dismiss it. He couldn't understand why a seemingly stable machine would suddenly develop such peculiar, application-specific crashes. Over the next few days, Mr. Henderson became a frequent visitor to Alex's desk. I observed his attempts with a mixture of fascination and a growing sense of slight unease. He tried everything short of a full system reformat. He spent hours researching online forums, typing in obscure error codes, hoping to find a similar case or a known solution. He downloaded diagnostic tools, running them tirelessly, analyzing logs that, to his non-technical eye, offered no clear answers. He checked drivers, updated system components, and even ran memory tests, convinced that perhaps a faulty RAM stick was the culprit. Each attempt, of course, yielded nothing. The game, and any other application I had subtly tainted, continued to crash with infuriating consistency. I watched him, a silent, almost invisible presence, as he wrestled with the phantom problem. He'd sigh in frustration, run a hand through his thinning hair, and then, with renewed determination, try another approach. He'd ask Alex to describe the crashes in more detail, probing for patterns, for any clue that might lead him to the root cause. Alex, for their part, played the role of the beleaguered employee perfectly, offering vague descriptions and feigning helplessness. They were, in their own way, trapped by their lie, forced to perpetuate the illusion of a malfunctioning work machine. The irony was delicious. Mr. Henderson, a man who should have been focused on client relations and project management, was instead dedicating significant portions of his day to troubleshooting a video game. His desk, usually neat and organized, became cluttered with printouts of error messages and technical articles. His phone calls, usually brief and to the point, sometimes extended as he consulted with external IT support, describing the baffling symptoms to bewildered technicians who, like him, couldn't pinpoint a cause. I could almost hear the conversations. Yes, it's just one application, mostly, but it crashes consistently. No specific error code, just a generic program stopped working. We've tried reinstalling, updating drivers. Yes, even a clean boot. A part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Mr. Henderson was a good boss, and he was genuinely trying to help. He was wasting valuable time and energy on a problem that I, and I alone, had created. But the larger part of me, the part fueled by months of accumulated frustration, found the situation immensely satisfying. This wasn't just about Alex's inconvenience. It was about the ripple effect, the way their idleness had now ensnared our supervisor in a futile quest. The unintended consequences, as I had initially thought of them, were now very much intended, a deliberate extension of my digital revenge. The office atmosphere, for me, had transformed. What was once a source of irritation had become a stage for my silent play. Every frustrated sigh from Mr. Henderson, every bewildered look from Alex, was a testament to the success of my carefully crafted intervention. The server hummed on, oblivious, as the human drama unfolded, a direct result of a single, strategically placed byte in the digital ether. The poor boss, completely in the dark, continued his valiant but ultimately pointless struggle against a ghost in the machine. The days blurred into a pattern of predictable frustration for Alex and Mr. Henderson. Alex would arrive, attempt to launch their game, watch it crash, and then descend into a visible state of agitation. Mr. Henderson would periodically appear at Alex's desk, armed with a new theory or a freshly downloaded diagnostic tool, only to be met with the same baffling failure. The cycle was relentless, and the strain began to show on both of them. Alex became noticeably more irritable, their usual laid-back demeanor replaced by a simmering resentment. Their focus, instead of shifting to actual work, seemed to be consumed by their computer's perceived malfunction. They would spend long stretches just staring at the screen, as if contemplating the digital abyss that had swallowed their entertainment. For me, the initial thrill of the prank began to mix with a more complex set of emotions. The amusement was still there, certainly. Watching Mr. Henderson, a man I respected, wrestle with a problem I had engineered was undeniably satisfying in a perverse way. It was a testament to the precision of my intervention, the untraceable nature of my digital sabotage. My revenge was successful, far more so than I had initially imagined. Alex was clearly miserable, their primary source of workplace distraction effectively neutralized. They were no longer gaming, no longer napping. The office was quieter, free from the distracting sounds of virtual battles. However, a subtle shift began to occur within me. The initial rush of righteous indignation had faded, replaced by a growing awareness of the collateral damage. Mr. Henderson was genuinely stressed. I saw him staying later, poring over technical manuals, his usual cheerful disposition replaced by a tired frown. He was losing sleep over this, dedicating valuable company time and his own personal energy to a problem that didn't truly exist in the way he perceived it. He was a good man, and he was being manipulated, albeit unknowingly, by my actions. The guilt, which had been a mere twinge before, began to grow, a persistent hum beneath the satisfaction. I started to question the ethics of what I had done. Was this truly justice, or had it veered into something more malicious? My intention was to curb Alex's idleness, to force them to be productive. But instead, I had created a situation where Alex was simply frustrated, not necessarily more productive, and Mr. Henderson was bearing the brunt of the unintended consequences. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, was caught in the crossfire, a casualty of my digital war. The thought of him endlessly troubleshooting, endlessly searching for a solution that wasn't there, started to weigh on me. The revenge, once so sweet, was now leaving a slightly bitter aftertaste. I had achieved my goal of stopping Alex's gaming, but at what cost? Had I become the very thing I despised, someone who created problems instead of solving them, albeit in a different way? The satisfaction of seeing Alex suffer was slowly being overshadowed by the discomfort of seeing Mr. Henderson suffer. The line between a clever prank and outright deception began to blur. I found myself wishing there was a way to undo it, to reveal the truth without exposing myself. But the beauty of my untraceable prank was also its curse. It was designed to be permanent, irreversible without a full system wipe, and revealing it would expose my own unethical actions. I was caught in my own trap, a silent witness to the escalating frustration of others, a frustration I had meticulously engineered. The game had truly changed, and I was no longer just the player. I was also, in a way, a victim of my own success. The guilt continued to gnaw at me, a persistent, uncomfortable presence. It wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it was a slow, steady erosion of my peace of mind. Every time I saw Mr. Henderson at Alex's desk, looking increasingly haggard, or heard Alex's frustrated sighs, the weight on my conscience grew heavier. The initial justification for my actions, Alex's laziness and the unfair distribution of work, seemed less compelling now, overshadowed by the collateral damage. I had set out to teach a lesson, but the lesson was being learned by the wrong person, and the consequences were spiraling beyond my control. I began to actively avoid eye contact with Mr. Henderson, fearing that my own guilt might somehow be visible in my expression. I found myself becoming more withdrawn, less engaged in casual office banter. The satisfaction I once felt had curdled into a quiet dread. I had created a problem that was now consuming valuable company resources and, more importantly, the mental well-being of a good man. The irony was not lost on me. I, the problem solver, had become the ultimate problem creator. The thought of confessing crossed my mind more than once. I imagined walking into Mr. Henderson's office, closing the door, and laying out the entire story: the frustration, the hexadecimal editor, the single byte, the timestamp manipulation. But the immediate follow-up thought was always the same: the consequences. Such a confession would undoubtedly lead to my immediate termination. It was a gross breach of trust, a malicious act of sabotage, regardless of the initial provocation. My professional reputation, painstakingly built over years, would be shattered. I would be labeled as unreliable, manipulative, perhaps even vindictive. The career I had worked so hard for, the passion I held for programming, would be jeopardized. The fear of professional ruin was a powerful deterrent, a cold hand gripping my resolve. So, I remained silent, trapped in my own web of deceit. The silence, however, was deafening. It was filled with the unspoken words of confession, the phantom echoes of Mr. Henderson's frustrated sighs. I considered other options, desperate to alleviate the situation without exposing myself. Could I subtly fix the file? Revert the byte change? But that would raise even more questions. Why would the problem suddenly disappear after weeks of persistence? It would be just as suspicious as the initial problem, perhaps even more so. The only way to truly fix it without suspicion would be a full system reformat, which Mr. Henderson was already considering as a last resort. The situation felt like a runaway train, gathering speed with each passing day. I had set it in motion, but now I was merely a passenger, watching helplessly as it hurtled towards an uncertain destination. The revenge, once a source of quiet triumph, had become a heavy burden, a secret that weighed on my soul. I longed for the days when the server hum was just a background noise, not a constant reminder of my ethical transgression. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, continued his valiant but increasingly futile struggle, and I, the architect of his misery, could do nothing but watch, trapped by my own cleverness. The situation had become a profound lesson in the unforeseen consequences of even the most meticulously planned acts of revenge. The breaking point for Mr. Henderson arrived subtly, not with an explosion of anger, but with a quiet, defeated resignation. After weeks of relentless troubleshooting, countless hours spent on Alex's machine, and numerous fruitless calls to IT support, he finally conceded defeat. I overheard him telling Alex, his voice tired, "Look, Alex, I've tried everything. Every diagnostic, every patch, every driver update. I even consulted with our external IT consultants, and they're as baffled as I am. At this point, I think the only viable solution is a complete system reformat." Alex nodded, feigning disappointment, but I could detect a flicker of relief in their eyes. A reformat meant a fresh start, a clean slate. It meant the game would likely work again, and their digital playground would be restored. For Alex, this was a victory, albeit one achieved through deception and Mr. Henderson's wasted efforts. For Mr. Henderson, however, it was a capitulation. He hated admitting defeat, especially when it came to technical issues he felt he should be able to solve. The decision to reformat wasn't just about reinstalling an operating system. It was an admission that a problem, which he had personally invested so much time and energy into, had utterly stumped him. He looked genuinely exhausted, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders slumped. The sheer amount of time he had dedicated to this phantom issue had clearly taken a toll on his other responsibilities, and I could sense the frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. The reformat process itself was a significant undertaking. It meant backing up all of Alex's work files, reinstalling the operating system, all necessary software, and then restoring the data. It was a multi-day process, requiring Alex's machine to be effectively out of commission for a significant period. This meant even more disruption to our team's productivity, another layer of unintended consequences that stemmed directly from my initial act. Mr. Henderson personally oversaw the backup, meticulously ensuring no important client data was lost. He then spent an entire afternoon installing Windows from scratch, followed by the myriad of drivers and applications required for our programming environment. I watched him, a silent observer, as he navigated the setup wizards, installed updates, and configured settings, all for a problem that was, at its core, a single altered byte. The guilt was now a constant companion, a heavy weight in my stomach. I had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams in stopping Alex's gaming, but the cost felt disproportionate. I had inflicted genuine stress and wasted valuable time for a man who had done nothing but try to help. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, was now performing a digital exorcism, purging a demon I had carefully placed within the machine. The irony was bitter. I had wanted to restore productivity, but my actions had led to even greater inefficiency, all channeled through the well-meaning efforts of our supervisor. As I watched Mr. Henderson meticulously install the last piece of software on Alex's freshly formatted machine, a profound sense of regret washed over me. The satisfaction of revenge had completely evaporated, replaced by a deep, unsettling feeling of remorse. I had played a dangerous game, and while I had won, the victory felt hollow, tainted by the collateral damage. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, had finally found his solution, but at a significant personal and professional cost. The story, for me, was no longer about Alex's laziness. It was about the unforeseen and regrettable consequences of my own actions. The reformat completed, Alex's machine was finally restored to its pristine, factory-fresh state. Mr. Henderson, looking relieved but still visibly tired, declared the problem solved and moved on to other pressing matters. Alex, with a renewed sense of anticipation, wasted no time in reinstalling their beloved game. I watched them, a knot of apprehension in my stomach. Would they immediately dive back into their old habits? Or had the weeks of frustration, the constant crashes, and the boss's intervention taught them any kind of lesson? The answer came swiftly. The moment the game was reinstalled, Alex double-clicked the icon. The loading screen appeared, the triumphant music played, and this time, it loaded without a hitch. The game launched perfectly. Alex's face lit up with a triumphant grin, a clear indication that the past weeks of digital torment were now a distant memory. They immediately immersed themselves in the game, the familiar sounds of virtual battles and leveling up fanfares once again filling the air around their desk. My heart sank. All that effort, all that guilt, all of Mr. Henderson's wasted time, for nothing. Alex had learned absolutely nothing. Their gaming habit resumed with the same intensity as before, perhaps even more so, as if making up for lost time. The rhythmic clicks of the mouse, the occasional triumphant shouts, the faint hum of the game's soundtrack, it all returned. It was as if the entire ordeal had never happened, as if my elaborate, meticulously planned revenge had been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience for them. The realization hit me hard. My revenge was successful in its immediate goal of stopping the gaming, but utterly failed in its ultimate purpose, to change Alex's behavior. They were still the same unproductive, game-addicted colleague. The only real outcome was that Mr. Henderson had been put through weeks of unnecessary stress and wasted countless hours on a phantom problem. The unintended consequences had not only been significant, but they had also been entirely borne by the innocent party. The bitterness of this realization was profound. I had gone to such lengths, committed an ethically dubious act, and endured weeks of guilt, all for naught. Alex had simply waited out the storm, letting Mr. Henderson deal with the fallout, and then resumed their old ways without a second thought. The feeling of being outmaneuvered, not by Alex's cunning, but by their sheer indifference and my own misplaced efforts, was infuriating. The office returned to its old rhythm, but for me, it was different. The server hum now felt like a mocking drone, a constant reminder of my failed endeavor. The clicks from Alex's desk were no longer just annoying. They were a symbol of my own foolishness, my misjudgment of human nature. I had tried to solve a human problem with a technical solution, and in doing so, I had only complicated matters, hurting an innocent party in the process. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, had solved the problem I created only for the original problem to resurface, untouched and unaffected. The entire experience had been a harsh, humbling lesson in the futility of certain kinds of revenge and the heavy, lingering cost of deception. The return of Alex's gaming habits was a bitter pill to swallow. The familiar sounds, once a source of intense irritation, now felt like a personal affront, a direct mockery of my elaborate scheme and the guilt I had endured. It was as if Alex were silently laughing at my efforts, oblivious to the lengths I had gone to, and the innocent party I had dragged into the mess. The office, which had briefly known a period of relative quiet and focus from Alex, was now back to its old, infuriating rhythm. I found myself increasingly withdrawn, not just from Mr. Henderson, but from the entire office dynamic. The secret I carried felt like a heavy cloak, isolating me. I couldn't share my frustration with anyone, nor could I seek solace or advice. The knowledge of my own ethical transgression weighed heavily, making me question my judgment and my character. I, who prided myself on integrity and problem-solving, had resorted to sabotage and deception. The self-image I had cultivated was crumbling under the weight of my actions. The irony was that while Alex's gaming continued, my own productivity, which I had initially sought to protect and enhance, began to suffer. The constant internal monologue of guilt and regret, the replaying of events, the analysis of my mistakes, consumed mental energy that should have been directed towards coding. My focus wavered, and I found myself making small errors, missing details, and generally being less efficient. The very problem I had tried to solve had, in a roundabout way, now infected me. I also noticed a subtle shift in my relationship with Mr. Henderson. While he never suspected my involvement, the weeks of frustration had left a mark on him. He seemed more wary, perhaps a little more cynical about inexplicable computer problems. He was still professional and kind, but there was a new, almost imperceptible distance between us. I imagined he was still processing the baffling nature of Alex's previous computer issues, and perhaps even wondering if Alex had been entirely truthful about the extent of their work-related problems. The trust, though not overtly broken, felt subtly strained, a consequence of the chaos I had introduced. The entire experience became a profound, albeit painful, lesson. It taught me that not all problems can be solved with technical solutions, especially when those problems are rooted in human behavior and ethics. It taught me the true meaning of unintended consequences, that actions, even those with seemingly clear objectives, can have far-reaching and often regrettable ripple effects. It taught me the heavy cost of deception, not just to others, but to one's own conscience. I never attempted another fix for Alex's computer. The risk was too high, the guilt too profound. I simply accepted the situation, albeit with a lingering sense of defeat. The revenge, once so satisfying, had become a source of enduring regret. I had won the battle but lost the war, and in the process, inflicted unnecessary hardship on an innocent party. The poor boss, completely unaware of the true cause, had borne the brunt of my misguided attempt at justice, and I was left with the silent, heavy burden of my secret. The hum of the server racks, once a symphony of purpose, now sounded like a dirge, a constant reminder of my folly. The passage of time did little to erase the memory of my actions or the lingering guilt. Alex continued their routine, seemingly unaffected by the digital turmoil they had inadvertently caused. Mr. Henderson, having moved past the unsolvable computer problem, refocused on his managerial duties, though a faint shadow of weariness seemed to linger in his eyes. The office returned to a semblance of normalcy, but for me, nothing was truly normal. The experience had fundamentally altered my perception of myself and my workplace.